Hi, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. Coming up in this episode, I'm interviewing Dr. Caroline Guerrero Cauchi. AAOMC members know her as the Lion. She is a pioneer of our industry, a trailblazer. She was the driving force behind Vision by Design's Bootcamp, as well as the International Fellowship Program for the International Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. The regular version of this episode is around 30 minutes. If you're one of our supporters on Substack, you're going to get the extended version of this episode, which is almost a whole other hour. So get ready for a great interview coming right up. Let's get to it. On this edition of the podcast, I have with me a very special guest, Caroline Guerrero Cauchi. In addition to being an outstanding orthokeratologist and an expert in myopia care, she's a board member of the International Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. She was a longtime board member of the American Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopia Control. And really during its most formative and important years of that organization, she created the Google group that's used by the Academy and various myopia sections all over the world. And, you know, she was part of she was the driving force behind the development and success of the accreditations of the International Fellowship Program in Orthokeratology and Myopia Control, as well as the International Certification of Myopia Management. And these are now both globally recognized accreditations. They're used both in Europe and Asia and all other places all over the world. She's also created the Tools for Your Team program for staff members, which is a pathway for the accreditation of Myopia Navigator. She is the creator of Vision by Design's Bootcamp for newcomers. And if I'm being perfectly honest, she was a core component of the success of that meeting overall, full stop. It would not exist today if it wasn't for Caroline Cauchi. And when they make the Hall of Heroes for our industry, Caroline will have a special statue in the Pioneer section because not only has she been a mentor, a guide, a source of inspiration for so many in our industry, including myself, but myopia optometry now is dominantly female, and it wasn't always that way. And one of the exciting things about optometry being dominantly female today is that women are going to be deciding the future of myopia management, what that looks like, the standard of care, how we practice. That's our future. So I want you to say thank you to Caroline when you see her in person, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome her to the program. Caroline, thank you for coming on my podcast.
Wow, thank you.
We have spent so much time together over the years. Caroline would work the booth with me at meetings, especially at Vision by Design. She's been a mentor to me. She's been like family to me. She's always believed in me and encouraged me. She's given me life advice. She's been straightforward with me. She's told me the tough things when I needed to hear them. The only other person I can think in our industry that I've spent more time with is my dad, is Carrie. But Caroline and I have had such a great time over the years. And one of the things that I was just reminded of is, Caroline, do you remember that video we made? I'll put a link to it in the show notes. The 1 minute intro to Ortho-K video that we made that you recorded the voiceover for.
Yeah.
In like your closet, right?
In my closet. Yeah. Yeah. Because, it was back then when we didn't have really great microphones. And the only way I could get a real quiet, nice soundproof my closet. Like, okay, let's go for it.
Yeah. And that video is still used today. When I was working with J&J, I went into several practices all over the country where they would be like, hey, does J&J have an intro to Ortho K video? Because this is the one I'm using right now, and it's the best one. And they would play the video, and I would hear your voice, and I would just start laughing almost hysterically. And they'd be like looking at me, and I'd be like, I'm sorry. I made this video with Caroline Cauchi. Like, we put it together, and she recorded it in her closet.
But I'm out of the closet now.
Yeah. And it's still the de facto video that you could put in front of a patient to, talk about Ortho K.
Yeah, real basic.
Yeah, but I mean, it worked and it's still working right now.
Yeah.
So I was just reminded of that.
Yeah, what a legacy.
Right, yeah. So what I want to do right now is kind of focus on 2005. That if I'm remembering correctly, because you and I have had so many conversations about like your life and where you've come from and the obstacles you've had to overcome. So I want to focus on like 2005, because if I'm not mistaken, that is your first Ortho K meeting with the Academy. Back then it was the Orthokeratology Academy of America. Is that correct?
Good research. Yeah, good research. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, hopefully I would know you very well.
So true.
So talk to us about that. Like, what was it like coming into that meeting? Because I know that your past history, especially in optometry, there was like, you were one of 7 women of your graduating class. You were 1 or 2 women who would go to optometry meetings, and men would just like completely discount you. But the OAA meeting, the Orthokeratology Academy of America meeting, was different and special for you. So what was that like?
Well, it was sort of interesting. We'll back up a little bit, just maybe a year or two, because where I first learned about Ortho K was from Paragon coming into a Vision Source meeting and making a pitch and teaching us how to fit their CRT lens. And it's like, this is pretty interesting. And so I dabbled around with it. And then there wasn't at the time much education. There were no meetings. There was no nothing. There was no articles. And so you had to really scramble to learn. And in my scrambling, I saw 2 things. One was an ad for wave contact lenses. And it's like, so you can make some changes to these lenses that you can't do on Paragon. That's kind of cool. So I had to struggle to really learn how to work to do a wave lens, because there wasn't anything. There was no documentation, nothing. You just kind of scrambled, talked to people, and finally figured it out yourself, through trial and error. And so then I saw a little thing about this meeting, this OAA meeting. It's like, what the heck is this? And so I signed up for it. I got there, and it was different because everybody was nice. They didn't shun me, and they didn't even know me, and they didn't shun me. People were friendly, and they were willing to share ideas. And that's that first meeting. I just went, learned, and then started really getting into it, because in the next meeting that I returned, I did my fellowship at that meeting and got my fellowship. Me and Ken Mahler were the first 2 people who did custom design contact lenses to get our fellowship together. So I got one with the grade. It's like, wow, okay, cool. And at that meeting, of course, it was fun, but I'd had a little tiny too much to drink, which is probably for me about a glass and a half of wine. And they were talking about board members, and they said, well, does anybody want to, volunteer for a board member position? And it's like, oh, what the heck? Well, I raised my hand, and of course I didn't get it because nobody even knew who I was. But it was just hysterical because everybody thought that was funny for 2 reasons. One is they didn't know me, and secondly, I was a woman, and all the board members were men. Yeah. So the next year, Carrie approached me and said, would you be interested? It's like, me? You're talking to me? And then I was on the board at that point. So, that was it. But I'd say, back in the day, the major obstacle was education. We just couldn't get it. And as soon as I found the OAA, which is what our academy was called back then, I started getting my education. And the obstacle was I didn't know about them. Now, they weren't that big before I joined, but still, they were there doing stuff. But it's just because they didn't have the budget, they couldn't advertise like everybody else could. So it's interesting. Yeah.
And I remember those days because, I first started working with the Academy in 2004. So I remember I remember the hand up moment. I remember you coming onto the board, and I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but like there was this idea of women in ortho K specifically back then. Part of that conversation, and I'm ashamed that this was part of the conversation, but I want the audience to see how far we've come. Part of that conversation was women are less likely to get into ortho K and myopia management because they want to start families and they want to have kids, and they're not going to be able to run their own ortho K practice, let alone have their own practice. And I remember at the time feeling really bad and ashamed of that viewpoint, because why would you exclude an entire group of people who are eager to come in and learn and contribute? And as like our first female board member, you contributed so much and never like made it a priority to take credit. You were kind of like our unsung hero, because you were doing so much for the academy, and whenever somebody needed something, you were right there helping out. And so it's like, that's one of the things that I want to point out. That's why you belong in this, not just as part of the pioneer generation, but that's why I was saying the statue in the Hall of Heroes. Because our future in this industry, women are picking up ortho K. They're defying that expectation. One more ceiling broken, right?
Yeah.
And so, take us back to when you first got interested in myopia management. Because if I'm not mistaken, that comes from when you were a special ed teacher before you even became an optometrist. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. That's what got me interested in vision, because I was working with kids who were handicapped, is what we called it then, in so many ways, but vision was one of them, and started working visually, and then thought, rather than the special ed, because this is sort of like not a dead end job, but I wanted a little bit more. I started looking into optometry, and unfortunately, I didn't have any pre-med, because my school that I went to for high school was kind of lower income, and so if you just weren't a fantastic, incredibly brilliant person, they put you in homemaking or whatever, and so I had to go back and take a whole bunch of pre-med classes. And I thought, how am I going to do this? How am I going to pass chemistry? And then I took the chemistry class. I was like, why did everybody say that was hard? That wasn't bad. And then, of course, I'd throw it before all the exams, but I would still get 100%, and so that was a little bit interesting, because I had to redo all the pre-med, but then I applied and got into UC Berkeley, blah, blah, and yay, cool.
Yeah. And you started your practice, I think, in 1975, if I'm
not that old.
Okay.
I started my practice in 84. I purchased
in 84.
it. 84.
Okay.
I graduated in 80, but I joined a practice in 80, and I worked there until 82 as a shared overhead situation. It was in Stockton, California. But then Mel, my husband, took a job down in San Diego, and it's like, okay, well, all right, let's go to San Diego, and I'll just give this up, because it was not exactly what I wanted anyway. Moved down to San Diego, and for 2 years started looking around for practices, and finally bought one in 84. And then it was fine. Mm-hmm.
And I think what I'm thinking of is like that process of you trying to join practices, because you would often get told, like, hey, we don't think women have a place in our practice. Like like, it just sounds like, I don't want to be disingenuous. It just sounds so insane to me.
I know. Well, at the time it wasn't insane. It was just like, okay, fine. Then that's how you feel. Then I don't belong here. Because what are you going to do? That was the culture. That's what they would say. And they'd say it to your face, and you'd think, they can't say that. That's illegal. And then it's like, oh, yeah, sure they can. Where's my microphone? What am I going to do about that? And you can't, you don't want to be in that practice anyway. So, it's fine. So, when you can't beat them, then you just buy a practice, which I did.
Do it yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And your experience by like being a special ed teacher and working with children, you recognized pretty early on that like women have an advantage when it comes to ortho-K and myopia management, if not just optometry or healthcare, in general.
Yeah.
And why is that? Like,
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. One is when the patients look at us, they see mommy, and so they're not scared. And so we're just not intimidating to kids. That's the first thing, I think. The second thing is women, we talk more than men. So we yakety yakety yak, and the patients spill their guts. And a lot of times that's really, really important, not just for eye stuff, but for their general health. And the parents will talk to me about problems with their children because they feel like they're talking to a friend. And we're just more engaging. Not that there aren't men that aren't that way. It's just that back in the day they weren't. And it was a very big advantage to be a woman, especially at a time when the public was actually a little bit ahead of the professional organizations, because the public wanted women doctors, but there weren't many of us, and the male doctors didn't want us. And so if we had our own practices, guess what? Everybody's banging on my door because they want a woman doctor. Ha ha, finally, so.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you said for many reasons. One specifically that I want to focus on is that, I'm a big part of this podcast is about identifying these lines of thinking, these mindsets that successful orthokeratologists and myopia management specialists have. And one thing that I picked up on is you talked about that relatability. And I think a huge factor of presenting myopia management is gaining the parents' trust, being genuinely authentic, and present, because this is a big conversation for ortho-K. And I just wanted to point that out because that is such a common feature that speaks to that advantage that you were talking about.
Yep, it's true.
Definitely. So, okay, so when you started doing myopia management, you had mentioned the Paragon CRT ortho-K lens. And I want to make a big deal out of this because I think a lot of new to myopia management docs look at someone at your level, not you, but somebody at your level, and think, and there's this like distance, there's this intimidation factor. They don't have it with you because you're very open, relatable, kind, empathetic. There's no stupid questions with you. And so what I wanted to talk about next was like, I want you to tell us like what kind of obstacles you faced getting started with ortho-K in the very beginning. Cause I think it's important for the audience to see that like these titans of our industry didn't just walk in and be like, boom, got it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So what talk about like a struggle point or an obstacle like that you had in the very beginning?
I said it earlier. It was learning how to do it. It's like it wasn't out there. And so we had to struggle to really learn all of that stuff. And every night you'd be combing the internet or talking to people, but the people were far and few between. So there weren't that many people to talk to. And you just really had to struggle because there were no books. There was no Montfort book, that basic book, nothing. And so that was just so very, very hard. And there was no blueprint for how to start a myopia management practice because there weren't any. And so you had to actually figure it all out on your own and make a protocol and figure it out. And now, young doctors can go to boot camp. They get all the education plus kind of like a how to do it, how to start it up thing. And that's as a basis of our navigation and figuring it out ourselves. But I would say basically, because we just didn't have anything, we had to write the book.
And is that how you designed Bootcamp? Because Bootcamp, I mean, I was just at Vision by Design at the time we're recording this is December 2024. We just had VBD in October. I went to a lot of the Bootcamp sessions. It's more days now than it used to be. There's so much more. So did you come up with Bootcamp based on your own, like, because you often say
my struggles.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Like, so did you come up with that off of the template of what you dealt with? And like, cause you
Yeah.
often say your practice needs to be like a machine,
Hmm.
how did you make your
Right.
practice like a machine?
Hmm. You know, I read all these crazy books about how to be successful and this and that. And when I read them, I go, yeah, I do that. And I do that. And I do that. Somehow my parents taught me to be very, very organized and very clever and a problem solver. And that's the main
Hmm.
thing. I'm a problem solver. And so once I looked at it, I said, okay, how do I make this work? And,
Hmm.
and I'll do something and sometimes it works. And sometimes it's like, oh no, that was a total disaster. Don't do that again. Okay. But that's all right because
Hmm.
you did it, you learned. And sometimes you may even try that 10 years later because maybe it's a different time. So,
Right.
it was just trial and error. And basically when I was done with that, it was like, okay, yeah, I had to struggle. But the people that are coming to VDD, they're having to go to these classes that are really kind of advanced and they sit there and go, oh boy, I wonder what this means. I don't think I'll do this. This is too crazy. It's like I said, no, no, no. We need the introduction so that the first day of VBD for them teaches them the very basics,
Hmm.
because the doctors that were on the board of directors didn't understand. And being an educator, I did that. You got to start with baby steps. Come on.
Right.
And
Right.
so we built it that way. And then every year it's like, hey, please, can I have 2 more hours to add to boot camp? Can I have 2 more hours to add to boot camp? Because you just couldn't cover everything in that shorter period of time. And now I think it's probably a day and a half. I would really like 2 days, but
Hmm.
that doesn't seem to be necessary. But you know,
Right.
yeah,
So you
more and more
mentioned
and more.
Paragon. So were your first fits Paragon CRT? Did you use the trial set?
Yes, yeah, because that's all that was around.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like when you fit the first RGP lenses were Paragon lenses too, but yeah, that was the first one around, and then there were probably other ones that were custom that I didn't know about that Carrie was inventing, but I didn't know Carrie at the time.
Right.
It's like, how do you get to meet Carrie? Well, you get to meet him at the OAA meeting, but yeah, Paragon was my first introduction.
Yeah. So, I think it was Matthew Martin who said, like, he was told, like, just start putting lenses on people's eyes,
Hmm.
because I'm going to do a whole episode about the generational divide between, each generation that's doing myopia management, because your generation had, like you mentioned, nothing to really learn off of. The current
Hmm.
generation has so much, where
Hmm.
like online, the academy, the AAOMC VBD is still the
Hmm.
best place to learn the latest and
Hmm.
best education in our industry. But there are so many other meetings and workshops. So
Hmm.
did you just start putting lenses on people's eyes? Were you like, oh, I got a myopia patient?
Yeah.
So tell us about that. Like, that's just
It,
how you did it.
yeah. I mean, you just did it. You read the book. It's like, okay, 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 let's try this. You put it on the eye. I mean, what you do is you try to find some of your family first so that they
Okay.
can't sue you, you know,
Right.
but you do it, then you look how it fits. And I did that for a while, but it was like, okay, but it's not sitting the way I want. And you can change the diameter well, you couldn't even change the diameter at the time, but you could change the base curve all you want, not working. So I I then that's when I searched out for Wave and then could
Hmm.
realize that I could change whatever I wanted and then I was fine. But I couldn't get there because I had to realize how it even looked on a well-fit lens. And then
Yeah.
when it wasn't, how could I fix that in a more complete way? So yeah,
Right.
but
So
yeah, dive in.
obviously your lenses weren't fitting perfectly every single time.
Right.
How did you make the jump from, because like there's three stages, right? Because right at this point you're like who you are now is a design fitter. You do wave,
Hmm.
you're making
Right.
your own lenses practically, right? You're
Hmm.
you're you're
Right.
designing everything from scratch essentially.
Hmm.
But back then it's got to be so intimidating to be like, okay, well this is kind of working, or this is working but then this change is happening. It's not centering correctly or whatever the case may
Hmm.
be. So
Yeah.
how did you get from that stage? Because I think that's a huge intimidation part for a lot of the new generation of doctors, the ones that I've encountered, it's like they're so squeamish to start the process that like once they get going, it's like, oh crap, well, this happened. Like, do you have like what did you do in that circumstance? Like,
Well, the nice thing was, Paragon did have some consultants that you could talk to, but at
right.
some point there was only so much that you could do with that lens because there was only so many curves you could manipulate, and so it's like, So then I I started with Wave, and they had people that you could talk to on the
Hmm.
phone, very nice people, and so they'd say, "Okay, well, try this," and then I'd write it down because everything I did, every lens when it didn't work, I'd say, "Okay, this is what the basics were, and this is what happened. So here's how I fixed it." And so I had this little notebook full of things that I did to fix it. So if I ever had a problem again, I would stop and say, "Okay, let me go look at my book and try and find something that's like it and see what I did to fix it." And then after a
Yeah.
while, you don't have to look it up anymore. But it was all trial and error,
Yeah.
and no one
I'm
died.
yeah, I think that's an important point to make. Like nobody died, right?
Yeah.
Like trial and error is such an important way to begin your ortho K journey, right? Because
Hmm.
so many of the consultants now will get on the phone with you and help you understand like what's happening on the eye, why are you getting this effect, what kind of things
Hmm.
that you can change. So tell us about like what was your aha moment? Like when did it finally just like kind of click into place for you?
It didn't.
Oh, it didn't.
It was just a slow process
Okay.
of trial and error, trial and error, trial and error, and then all of a sudden it was like, damn, I'm
Uh-huh.
doing it. It's working. It's the coolest thing ever.
Okay.
But it wasn't anything like that. It was just sort of slowly but surely it got better and better and better and better. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, they're usually fitting now instead of having to do five different lenses.
And
So
how many, I mean, like not exactly, but like how many patients did you try to fit Ortho K on before you got to that point, do you think?
maybe like 30. It wasn't
Okay.
a ton, but it was 30 rough patients. But
I think that's important though, because
yeah.
again, that generational divide, like I got a huge education over the last couple of years because, I worked with the AAOMC with doctors like you for like 18 years. So I got to work with like the best of the best
Hmm.
of the best, right? And I just got used to that mentality. And when I switched gears and found myself in the practices of doctors who weren't of that mindset, like they would get disillusioned after like one or two fits that didn't go exactly as planned. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I
And
guess that's because, I had to learn everything myself. And so I was used to investing the time. And
yeah,
I just thought if I'm buying four lenses, it's an education. It's like going to a seminar or something like that. Don't worry about it. And that's really the most important part. So don't worry about in the beginning burning through some lenses. And now they even have like free redos, which is kind of cool. But the time, it's like, you know what? Yeah, it took me like 10 visits to fit that lens. Oh, well.
uh-huh,
But I was
yeah,
learning with each visit, and I just thought of it as my education. And I think if new doctors could get that mindset, I think they would be happier because they
yeah,
wouldn't worry about, oh, well, this should be done that quickly. Because everybody wants, with the internet, boom, I want everything
hmm,
done quickly. Not everything can be that quick. And the slower you go, the more successful you are and the happier you are. So I've never worried about it, never looked back.
right, yeah. 30 patients. I love it. I love it. I wish I had known that. Even a year ago, I can remember a certain doctor who it was like. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the docs that are out there that start to get interested in myopia management don't have a lot of time to spend with patients.
Hmm.
And if you want to do myopia management, you got to be great with kids. You got to have time to see those patients and
Hmm.
and work with their parents. And I think that like I'm just thinking of these doctors that got so in their own head about like one case or two cases or whatever it may be. But like, how do you? What is your advice to them? Like, how do you make the time in your practice for a myopia patient?
I look at it as an investment in the practice
Okay.
because the the performance of Ortho-K and myopia management, and they're not exactly they're the same thing, but they're not the same thing. It's investing in your future because it's securing your practice. If you want to keep sitting in a room saying which is better, one or two, one or two, one or two, one or two, okay, because that's secure and it's easy. Well, it's sort of secure and it's certainly easy, but it's boring as all get out, So I look.
All right, well, that's it for this regular version of the episode, but the discussion doesn't stop here. It actually continues in an extended version of this episode, which is available to our Substack supporters. You can, if you're interested in getting the rest of the episode, consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. In addition to an extended version of this episode and every other episode that we do, you'll also get access to exclusive monthly bonus episodes of the Myopia Mindset. And I know you're interested. You've made it this far. And for the cost is $12 a month, which is basically the cost of a cup of coffee each and every week. And that's how I like to put it. Listen, if you would buy me a cup of coffee each and every week to nerd out about myopia, to bring on amazing guests, to spread the word about how awesome myopia management is and how more ECPs should be engaged in this specialty, then please consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. You can do so on our Substack. myopiamindset.substack.com is how you do that. Thank you so much for your consideration. I'll see you at the next one.